How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to our routine Tuesday night live dialogue. This is going to be interesting. Hopefully we have some fun. I'm sure we'll get some people coming in shortly. A couple of things before we bring on our guest today, or co-host guest, basically the panel. Tomorrow night, we are going to be on a channel called Duty Ron, and we're going to be discussing how to deal with high-profile inmates. That's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be me and Connie. We also touched on the topic the other day with Gary York. So if you guys are interested, I believe it's the last video that we just did. Now, guys, this is a live dialogue, so it's going to be fun. If you guys like what you get, I appreciate if you hit the like. The more engagements, the better. Today, we're going to be talking about dealing with confrontational inmates. But with that said, we would like to keep on the topic. But if there are certain questions that travel off, we will probably get to those questions as well, because a lot of us are, ADHD. Ooh, look, squirrel. And we're going to go ahead and go wherever that attention goes. But at the very beginning, we do got to get the idea of the topic out there, the theme. So the theme is dealing with confrontational inmates. So today, I do have three other people that are going to join me. First, we have the author, the famous author. Now, what's funny is I haven't even said this person's name, but she automatically assumes it's her. Because it is, though. Because we do it all. Yeah, there it is. It is. But we have Connie. Hey, what's going on, Connie?
Hi, everybody. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the author of The Cage Was a Cocoon, and I'm looking forward to another Tuesday night of Q&A with you guys.
Yeah, we're excited, obviously, to have you. And we also have the founder of Keepers of Chaos, the infamous Russ Hamilton. What's up, Russ?
I'm here, and I've been promoted to infamous. Is that right?
Is that a promotion?
I don't know. From my point of view, it is. Maybe not from somebody else's. But no, it's great to be here. Keepers of Chaos doing great. We're closing in on 5,000 members. And anyway, I'm just glad to be able to add my 2 cents worth here tonight.
Yes, and we have a special guest today, the founder of a channel on YouTube called True Prison Stories and the author of Corruption Behind Bars. We have Gary York.
Hello, Anthony. Hello, Connie. Hello, everybody. Take care, and I'm glad to be here tonight. And thank you for having me. I'm the author of Corruption Behind Bars. I retired a couple of years ago after 28.8 years in corrections. And I have a YouTube channel called True Prison Stories. And I think the topic tonight is very important. Thank you for having me, Connie, Russ, and Anthony.
By the way, I forgot to put this on the bottom when we had Russ. So, Russ, just stand there for a second. Don't say anything. There it is. Please join Keepers of Chaos on Facebook. I still left Connie's book on the bottom, but I want to give you the fair exposure. So you could just stand there and just look as handsome as you are, and just please join Keepers of Chaos, guys, if you get a chance. I forgot to do that. Guys, by the way, I'm trying to, host a show and then produce my own stuff. So I'm getting better every day. All right. So, guys, real quick, the show is sponsored by two entities, I guess. American Military University. By the way, guys, they've been with us since day one. I mean, since Tier Talk started, they've just always been supportive of what we do. So if you guys are looking to seek higher education, get those degrees, because the key here, guys, if you get those degrees, you're bringing experience into the classroom. And that's a great way to mold those young minds. So if you get a chance, guys, please check out American Military University. And we also have another sponsor, Guardian RFID. So from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence, Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit Guardian RFID for more information. So again, guys, today's topic is going to be dealing with confrontational inmates. So again, we may venture off. I'm sure we're definitely going to get some questions from you guys, but I thought at the very beginning we can kind of share our experiences in dealing with those inmates, and hopefully when we share our stories, we give a little bit of tidbits and advice, and then we're also going to try to get to the questions. When you guys post a question, what I will do, guys, is highlight the question and post the question on the screen so everybody can see, obviously, who asked the question, but also they can also read the question, because sometimes we may get some very good responses inside the comments. And if I do have any people that are asking some really good questions, I decide, I don't know so much for this stream, but maybe next stream, I'll start sending them maybe a link. And once in a while, if you guys have a question, I could bring you on to the stream and you can ask us face to face. I just want to make sure I kind of know who the people are before I bring them onto the stream, because it is a live stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with Connie first. Connie, when dealing with a confrontational inmate, I'm sure you've had a few. You work in medical, so any stories you'd like to share first?
So, I mean, I don't know so much a story. I think it's more so just a lot of times we just want to shut them down because they're being disruptive, or many times they're coming off disrespectful. And for me, what I found that works the best is that you listen to them. Not listen because you have no other choice but to listen, but listen because usually there's something in there that they're trying to get out, and they may not know the best way to tell you whatever it is they're trying to tell you. So listening to them for me has really been the let's get to the meat and potatoes of why you're down here and why you're about to be the next code. Because many times they start, escalating voices. And, as administrator, like I'm okay ending an interaction, right? Because I'm not going to allow you to sit and be disrespectful to me. But also, depending on relationship with custody is not going to allow this inmate to just yell at me. So for me, it's a matter of how do I contain this situation, figure out what he really wants, because if I don't deal with it today, I'm going to have to deal with it tomorrow. So the listening for me is number one. Typically, my default is to just kind of listen and see where they're coming from. And then if there's just nothing in the midst of that, I'll end that. I literally will end any meeting and let them go along about their business. And whatever sort of happens after that is typically nothing that I would concern myself with, simply because there seems to be no validity to whatever they're down there making noise about.
You know what's funny? And by the way, Connie, again, that's great advice. I mean, we're getting a lot of love in, and we do have a question already, so I will get to that, Andy. I just want to kind of share some stories, then we'll focus on the question. I'll give mine out now real quick. And I've shared the story before, but I think this story kind of opens up to a lot of really good advice, and I want to put it out there. So when I first started in corrections, within the first couple of days, I'm still focusing on my perception of authority. To me, that was golden. I got it. I had to make sure that the inmates see me with that perception of authority. I didn't expect them to, I didn't expect the uniform to kind of, I didn't lean on the uniform. This was about me. This was about me, who I was, how I carried myself. So I remember having to deal with a female inmate who, I forgot, maybe just having her do some cleaning or something like that. And then we would constantly have a back and forth. And she would do the job. She would do the cleaning, but we would just have this back and forth because she just had a mouth off all the time as I was trying to give her this directive. Now, mind you, the inmates are watching this interaction, but also one of the senior officers in the office is also watching this interaction. So we're going back and forth for a few days now. And, she's saying her remarks and, I would go back and say mine. And we're just going back and forth because to me, even though she was doing the order, it was about pride. Even as she's walking away, she's saying these little remarks. And, as she's saying these remarks, I'm thinking like, she's questioning my authority. So we're just kind of going back and forth. So when I finally step away and I go into the office to talk to the senior officer, who's the regular, and he was just a good dude. When I got into corrections, I was surrounded by a lot of good senior staff. We didn't do the sink or swim, but they did kind of watch you. They wouldn't let you go too deep, but they would watch you. They would let you do things a little bit. So he goes, "How'd you think you handled what was there? What was happening?" So I thought I did well. You know what I mean? I didn't let her question my authority. And, and when she said something, I got right back. And he goes, "What's funny? Did you see the environment around you?" And I said, "Yeah, there was a lot of inmates watching this interaction." And he goes, "Do you honestly think you had control?" Now, I have to be, honest with myself. Do I think I had control? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, obviously, if I didn't have control of myself, there's no way I'm controlling her. We're just going back and forth. This wasn't about my authority. This was about pride. So I said, "No, maybe not. I can see where you're getting at." He goes, the problem is you're giving her directives in an environment that's they want her to go against those directives. So she's motivated by the inmates watching her. You're never going to win. You're going to give her all these directives, but she's always going to have that last remark because you're doing it right in front of the other inmates. So just like you're battling with pride, because maybe you see me watching you, she's doing the same thing. Guarantee you take this inmate aside and talk to the inmate by themselves, it's going to be a totally different interaction. So again, mind you, this is a more of a passive aggressive inmate. This is not an inmate that was, violent, just kind of walking away and just kind of, rambling on. So the next day, I just say, let me be a little bit different here. Let me go ahead, and when I start my day, I go into my office and I called the inmate into the office. I said, hey, are we going to do this back and forth? And the moment she entered the office, it was like, I heard her like a deep breath. And I'm thinking, are you tired? She goes, yeah, I'm tired of the back and forth too. It's just at that moment, what do you expect me to do? And I'm sitting there like, I get it. So what I decided to do is and this is just right off the get-go, and it was great advice from the senior officer, is that you're going to get a totally different inmate when you deal with them on alone, one-on-one. So when you have that problematic inmate, and guys, we're not talking about emergent, just little back and forth, take the inmate aside, obviously make sure, if you have support staff, they know where you're at, and address the inmate, say what's going on, try to have that one-on-one, and you'll find out when you don't have that environment that's provoking that inmate to do something foolish, you're going to get a whole different inmate. And then that private dialogue, whatever you have, it does set a standard, because at the end of the day, as we progress, I never had a problem with that inmate again. It was just a respect now that we have with each other. So again, pulling the inmate aside, having that dialogue, having control of the environment, having control of myself, gave me a different inmate to deal with. And that is what helped me kind of set that foundation where I'm not going to battle for pride. I'm going to take that inmate aside, have that one-on-one, and I will tell you 9 times out of 10, in my mind, that works. Hey, what's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, when we're dealing with these people, when we start talking to them, there is a whole spectrum of this idea about, just what a confrontation is. It can be something simple and small. It can be something that's going to devolve into, a real confrontation. It can be something that's going to require the immediate use of force. So, you just have to keep in mind everything around you. You have to keep in mind what that inmate's end goal is. You have to keep in mind where you want to steer it to, and whether you're even able to steer it there at all. So there's a lot of different things going on. The bad thing about all those things going on is they tend to split your attention. When you get your attention split, it's easy to make a mistake. It's easy to push the wrong button. It's easy to not be aware that the thing is starting to escalate, even though maybe you thought it was starting to drop out. And you can end up in a really bad and disadvantageous position if you're not, trying to keep the focus where it should be. Because the expectation almost always is that you're supposed to go in there and you're supposed to de-escalate. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. Yeah, well, what about all the times that doesn't work? So you really do have to be careful. And eventually you get better and better and better at it. So if you're feeling you're not good at it right now, don't worry. Those skills are going to improve. Those skills to be able to resolve things are going to get better. You're probably going to be able to resolve most things without having to rely on cuffing somebody or using force or that kind of thing. But still, don't let that go out of your mind that may be where this is going every single instant.
Hey, Gary, I gotta ask you too, Gary. Have you ever had dealing with an inmate where you actually just had to kind of take a breath, step back, and then refocus, and then go back and try to keep that calm, cool, and collectedness that we all know you for?
That calm, cool collectiveness. Okay. Well, I'll tell you, I try to stay calm, and I do realize that we have to stay calm in these situations when dealing with confrontational inmates, because if we are not calm, we need to show a presence that we are serious. We need to show a presence that we mean business, but we don't want to show too much of an aggressive presence at the beginning because we want to de-escalate. Now, as Russ said, if the inmate won't de-escalate, and these things don't work, well, then we're going to have to use force. But I will tell you a story. When I went from the prison system to the jail, I'm at the South County Jail, and at the jail, we have lockdowns at several times of the day, and this one inmate would not lock down. We usually call lockdown, sooner you're in, the sooner you're out. We're going to come in and do count. Well, they all locked down, but this one inmate. So I went in, and remember, folks, keep your safe distance at all times. Don't walk right up to them. Keep a safe distance, because this inmate did not lock down. So I'm asking him questions. I acknowledge that I understand. I'm trying to find out what his problem is. And then all of a sudden, something hit me. I stepped back and I thought, wait a minute. In my mind, I'm thinking, I think I'm dealing with some mental health issue. So number one thing I don't do, I will listen to an inmate. I will acknowledge that I understand what they're telling me. I will ask them to clarify, but I'm not ever, this is me, folks, just me. I will never agree with an inmate, and I will never apologize to an inmate. I've seen these two things taught some places. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not agreeing and I'm not apologizing, but I will talk to you. What I will do is suggest something. So when I realized I think this is a mental health inmate, he's probably not in the proper dorm where he needs to be, I gave him a couple of choices. And he liked that, because he got to pick one of those two choices. So he thinks, okay, and he picks a choice. Either way, he's going to go lock down. And he understood, and we came to an agreement, and he went in and locked down without a fight. Isn't that what we want to do? Don't we want to get things done the easy way, work smarter, not harder? We don't want to go hands-on with these inmates. So, of course, I wrote an incident report and reported that maybe he needs to be evaluated. Later on, the next day, he was evaluated. He was moved to another dorm eventually. But try to work smarter, not harder in these situations. If we have to use force, folks, we're going to use it. We all know that. But let's try to avoid it if we can.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something, guy. By the way, that's spot on. I think for me, my thing is having control of myself. I think that sometimes there are going to be inmates that if they know that you have buttons, they're going to push them. I mean, that's what they do. And then the moment you start to act up, you may think that you're winning the battle, but you're losing. It shows that you have no level of control. And then the other inmates also start to see that. And again, they're going to do what they can to kind of push those buttons. So I like the officers that when you have the inmates that are trying to test them, they keep that level of professionalism. They keep that level of coolness, because then I want to tell you something. When you have those officers that do have that level of control, and you see it every day, the moment that they have to get a point across and they're aggressive with that perspective, everybody shuts up and listens, because the officer is not always at 110%, you know, so it puts a little bit more of a emphasis on when there is a concern. But when you have that officer that doesn't have that control and just constantly yelling and going back and forth, they're not going to have that extra emphasis when they have to really regulate something, because people are like, oh, that's just them. That's just who they are. Hey, Andy asked a good question. I want to try to get some of the questions, and this is actually related directly to what we're discussing. And by the way, real quick, I do like that comment from Clee Fit. Never make a promise to an inmate. I agree with that 100%. I think that's something that we could touch on as we move forward. But I want to go back to Andy's question. He goes, what are some of your go-to responses when dealing with the difficult inmates? So I thought first I can go with Russ on that and then move my way through the rest of the panel.
Okay, so one of the things that I usually try and do is I first try and, establish the fact that I'm listening to the inmate, right? And one of the ways that I initiate that is I try and come at him with a lower level of energy. If you're, up on your toes and you look like you're ready to fight, you're going to put more energy into that situation. I am not saying that you should not be ready to fight. What I'm saying is maybe you should hang back a little bit, right? Hanging back gives you what? Gives you distance, which gives you time and all that stuff. You should, keep your hands in a ready position, but you should look ultimately relaxed. Bringing that relaxation into that will cause that inmate to relax too, hopefully. Not all inmates are like that, but I'm just telling you what I go with. Then usually I tell them something like, hey, just hold on a minute, just cool down for a second. I'm going to give you a chance to speak, right? And then I go from there and I give them a quick chance to speak. And then I repeat that back to them. So what you're saying is, right, that way they feel listened to. And then I tell them, okay, now I want you to listen to what I have to say. And, you know, this, and this is why I can or can't do that. And I try and take all the fire out of it and try and put them in a position where they feel obligated to accept what I have to tell them. Does that always work? Is there even a chance it's going to work? Maybe, maybe not. But those are the things that I like to start out with, right? But that's only assuming that we're at a point where, you know, some rational dialogue is still possible, because there's all kinds of confrontations where that just isn't the case. You know, an inmate starts to putz on you, starts to move. He decides maybe he's going to run away. Maybe he's, you know, got some evidence that he's going to try and flush. All of these things, you know, no, then it's go time, go time, go time. You better be ready to handle everything, all the way from just telling an inmate no, to having a conversation, to placing them in handcuffs, to using force on them, and everything that's in between that gradient.
Yeah, thanks. And Connie, you know, again, same question from Andy. What were, you know, as medical, obviously you deal with a lot of it as well. Obviously, the inmates expect something or want something, and you're in that position to say no. And especially if you're dealing with inmates that are addicts, they wind up really wanting something and could be totally disrespectful, and you still have to hold your ground. So what would be some of the automatic things? I know for a civilian, it may be a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's an automatic ask the questions, right? Because I think it's the asking of the questions that you start to get to understand what exactly that they want. And then I can decide whether or not it's something that we can give or not give. But it is the questions that inform me why the person is acting however they're acting. Specifically, you know, you have an inmate who may come down, you know, I didn't get my MAT meds today. And it's like, well, why didn't you get the meds? And, you know, sometimes they get irate because they just want it. But at the end of the day, you know what time Medline is. Were you with legal, right? Because were you at school? Like, because there are acceptable reasons why you would miss Medline. And then there are unacceptable reasons why you would miss Medline, right? So it's those kind of things that we kind of try to help work through. And sometimes they'll get aggressive, but at the end of the day, you can't make me do it, right? And so, you know, someone put in the comments, like, you know, ask them whether or not like their behavior is going to get them what they want. And that's the truth. Like, if you conduct yourself like, because I am here to help you, right? Coming from the medical service provider perspective, I'm here to help you. And if you're conducting yourself in this manner, it's not going to help you get whatever it is you're out to get, right? There's a way for us to have this dialogue, and you're either going to comply with what I'm telling you, because the thing that I think really sticks out is, as Gary mentioned, was really offering suggestions or giving recommendations. So here's what we could do, right? Because we may not be able to get you what you're looking for, because those meds are prescribed and you're supposed to take it at a specific time. But here's what we can do. And I think sometimes offering the alternative also lets them know that you are actively listening. You do understand where they're coming from, and you're going to try your best to get them what they need, not necessarily what they want, but what they need in the moment. And hopefully that de-escalates the situation. And if it doesn't, then, you know, we kind of just move on from there, and whatever that looks like at the time, because you got to be prepared to know that being reasonable and talking isn't going to always work.
Yeah, and I know, like, for the civilians, I think there's a balance too, Connie, if I may, before we get to Gary. I think there's a level where we want the civilians to be able to have some level of control and authority, but we also want them to be aware of when they need to ask for help. You know,
absolutely.
So, yeah, I always tell civilians, I don't want them to think that the help that custody provides is a way to negate their authority, because when we come, we're there to support your position and hopefully emphasize in that level of authority. But I also want the civilians to see that. I don't want the civilians to see us as, where you're, we're coming because you're weak. That's not what the purpose is. We're coming to show support. So how do you get that balance across of, yeah, you got to get the authority, but when you need help, how do you make it known that when you're asking for help, it's to reinforce your level of authority.
Yeah, so what we've always done is just, I think, so the intentional effort to build relationship with custody has to be there. And then there has to be the discussion that custody is there as the enforcer, right? Like, so if I've given a directive or I'm telling the inmate something and he's just not complying, like, it's not, I'm not custody. And I think the more civilians acknowledge, like, you're not there to be custody. That's not your role. Like, you have to be able to respect that custody has a role. And when it has now gone with outside of your scope, you got to be okay to say, hey, listen, I need your help. Can you come support me? Or this is going on. Because I've walked away from an inmate talking, gone right over to the medical officer and say, hey, listen, this is what's going on. He can't get it or she can't get it, whatever it is. And then the officer will actually step in and say, all right, come on, let's go back to your unit. And that takes me out of that space. And I think also it gives the inmate the message that we're supported by custody and I do have the ability to escalate. So if you're not complying with me, I can now take it to the next level and go to custody for the support, as opposed to me trying to take care of it on my own and put myself in harm's way, possibly.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Connie, because I think I want people to get that idea out there. That shows that we're communicating. That shows that we're part of a team. So I love when the inmates see that civilian call for that custody and custody come right back and we reinforce that connection. They see how well we're working together because one, that should put in the inmate's mind, okay, you know what? There's no separating between these two, because trust and believe, if the inmates know that there's a divide between custody and civilians, they're going to love to isolate, either one, whatever they could do, most likely working on the civilian. So I think that it's great to see custody in the background reinforcing that, by reinforcing them, that presence, it's also going to help that civilian get across what they need. And again, it doesn't negate that civilian's level of authority. Actually, it emphasizes it through the connection. Because I just want to mention something too. When I was a rookie and I was a CO, when I was learning the world, learning how corrections work, it was my peers who had my back that reinforced my authority, because it showed that I had connection, that I had communication, that I wasn't alone. It's not a sign of weakness, guys. It's a showing that they're here. We're all working together. So as one, we show up as that team. And to me, it's the perfect picture for me. Hey, Gary, so what's your thoughts on Andy's question? You're 28 years and change. What are some of your go-to responses when dealing with difficult inmates?
Well, I like to take the inmate, whether it's prison or jail, and say, look, we're holding up progress. The rest of the inmates want to go to chow, or we're holding up progress. These inmates want to get out of here and get to their classes or get to their work assignments, or these inmates need to get to medical and dental. So why don't we take your problem and talk about it? And in the jail, we could remove them from the dorm. First, we're offering them, we're going to find a solution to your problem, but let's get you out of the dorm. And we had a holding cell outside of the dorm. And state prisons are different everywhere. But if you can remove that inmate without a fight from the area and get them away from all the other inmates, I think that's very important. So my go-to thing was kind of throwing, hey, you're holding up these other inmates. Now, inmates don't like to make other inmates angry. I kind of use that angle to get them to calm down. Let's fix your problem. But in the meantime, these inmates are waiting on us to get count done so they can get moving to their areas. And that worked lots of times for me. Sometimes it didn't. But you're doing two things. You're getting them out of the area so there's no show for the other inmates. You're getting them separated from everybody and isolated. So if something does go down, now it's just you and this one inmate and not you having to deal with this inmate surrounded by other inmates.
And you know what's unique? I want to add something to this when dealing with a confrontational inmate. Remember at the very beginning, I mentioned a story about having to pull that inmate away and dealing with them separately. And then you get Brennan saying the same thing, always separate themselves from their peers. Look what we just said on the opposite of that. How do you reinforce the strength? By being next to your peers. So that's our level. So you see what we did there? We knew that the inmate's strength was being connected with their peers. So we pulled them away so we can have that one-on-one dialogue to have some level of control. But now on the adverse side of that, how do we, have that support? Well, it's the adverse of that is that we stay connected with our peers. So you can actually see there's a relationship there. And I thought that was kind of like a full circle moment. What do you call it? Had a great question. Exalfiel. I think this is a very good question. I'll start with Gary first on this. So Exalfiel says, could other inmates help with difficult inmates? For example, with someone refusing to go to lockdown, the other inmates may not like their normal schedule being disrupted. So I do have a perspective on this, but I would like to hear you guys first. So I'll go with Gary first.
Well, it's kind of like what I just talked about, why we're removing the inmate and telling him he's disrupting the other inmates. But I'm going to be honest with you. I may be wrong, but I don't like other inmates helping me. Now, if I'm in trouble and I'm being beaten and my backup in there, of course, I'm going to be happy if an inmate helps. But I don't think we're talking about that. I'd like the other inmates to let me run security, and I will tell them, get back. I would hope they're locked down already, but if they're not, if you're in an open bay dorm and there's no way to lock them down, then we need to get back up in there, which brings me, Raphael, to something that I wanted to say at the beginning. Always know that your safety is first, and the people that work in the prison, their safety is first. So if you have a confrontational inmate that's starting to get other inmates riled up, remember, get that backup, call for backup. Your radio's right here. Just call for backup. And if you need to get in the safe zone, get out of there. Listen, folks, our safety is the one that's more important. We don't have to rush anything. Do not rush into it. Back out if you have to and wait for backup, and then go in and take care of the problem. But Raphael, I just don't want inmates running my security, or helping me.
Yeah, I want to comment on just something, and we'll go to Russ and Connie. My concern is when you start relying on the inmates, there's going to be that level of obligation. Plus, why do I need the inmates to help me when I have staff? Now, granted, there could be situational moments where you could have an inmate acting out, and maybe you have that one inmate, I'll talk to him, and I still kind of want to be involved in that a little bit because I don't need someone. I kind of look at that as they're taking control because they think I can't. I'm not. Listen, if I have a chance to show my control, I am. If I have to, show that, hey, I'm in control of whatever's going on, I'm going to emphasize that level of control. We do have certain inmates that are elected to represent the population. They're elected fairly by the inmate population. They kind of give us the heads up as to what's going on. Obviously, those are inmates that we do have a working relationship with. I'm not going to say we trust them, but they're in a position where they are elected by the inmates to speak for the inmate population. So at that point there, we are going to listen to what they have to say. And most of the times when they bring us concerns, those concerns do help us because we're able to solve them before they kind of escalate, before it gets out of our control. They tend to be like, I want to say like the inmate union, if you will. I don't know if that's another way of saying it. But having said that, if I was dealing with an inmate and the inmate was kind of, I don't know, just aggravated or upset, another inmate came and said, I'll talk to them, I'm like, no. I got this. Like, I'm not, this is for me to handle, not for you. The last thing I want to do, guys, is put myself in a position where I'm obligated to that inmate, because how do I know that this isn't a setup either? How do I know this inmate isn't acting this way so this other inmate can come in and be the good guy? You know what I mean? I need to let them know that I don't accept favors. Hey, I appreciate you want to help me. I get it. But I'm not going to come to you for help. I'm going to deal with the inmate myself. Or if I have a concern, I'll call one of my peers, and they'll help me address it. Because even when we talk about inmates saving an officer's life, I discussed this in my manipulation book. The concern here is that you have that immediate need to want to pay that back. It's a feeling of obligation that it could be very overwhelming. So usually if you have an inmate that does save an officer's life, I think management needs to transfer the inmate out to another facility, because you don't really want to have that officer in that position of obligation towards an inmate. Even if the inmate did the right thing, I get it. I'm not, we do have inmates that are going to protect, our staff, because maybe it's in them. Maybe they want to help. But having said that, that may make it hard for that officer or that staff member to be objective when dealing with that inmate. Plus, we don't know if it's a setup. We don't know if there's a game being played and that inmate is meant to present to be the hero, to force that obligation. So again, if you have that inmate that always looks to help, my concern is the help becomes a favor. Now the favor is a problem for me, because when it comes to a favor, it's that I owe you now because you've been helping me. I'm not a big fan of that either. But what's your thoughts on that? Whoever, is it Connie or Russ? Whoever wants to go next. Russ?
I'll take it, because you stole practically all my thunder, but I'm going to take it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But nevertheless, I'm going to take it deeper. You know, this is that situation where we really have to, you know, look at this, and I call it a game. Some people don't like that, but you have to understand the depth of the game that you're playing. And you're absolutely right when we talk about these situations where there's obligation, or, as you know, I've talked about it often, you know, we talk about quid pro quo and things like that. Yeah, this inmate could be doing that and inserting himself into a situation to ingratiate himself to you. More than that, the other inmate might be involved in setting this up to have that inmate ingratiate himself to you. Or if it's not that, just to show you how deep this game can go, the inmate that's coming in to solve things may not be trying to manipulate you. He might be trying to manipulate that other inmate. He might be looking to get something from that guy. He comes up to you and says later, hey, you know, I smoothed it over or whatever, and if you can just, you know, call the nurse, and that happens or something, right? And then he goes back and hits that inmate, hey, I did this for you. Now you got to do something for me, right? Very predatory behavior when they start acting like that, and it happens all of the time. So you've got to be, you know, in a position where you understand the level of this game. Maybe even like in a best case scenario, maybe everybody's being on the up and up about what's going on. The one inmate, he really is kind of upset. The other inmate really does want to help. But you know what? Later that erodes and devolves into something else. It just becomes that sense of obligation. It just becomes, you know, that idea of, hey, you know, maybe he does feel obligated to me. Maybe I've got something coming now. So before you go in there with the idea that inmates are going to help you achieve this goal, be sure that you've set it up in such a way that there is no obligation, and that it's only going to affect that one moment in time. Other than that, I would completely stay away from anything like that, unless you are so on top of your game that you understand all of these various games that can be played and all these various layers of the onion. Because it's probably even deeper than I think it is. And I'm always looking at it, you know, in some kind of Machiavellian way.
Yeah, and guys, that's sort of what we have to do. Now, Ralphio, that was a great question, because I know it happens. When you have inmates that are confrontational, there could be some other inmates that may come out of the woodwork that says, hey, I'll help you with this. And I'm sure there'll be some staff that don't look at it from this perspective. So it's great that we have this dialogue. And Andy, keep the questions coming. They're great, informed questions, and the community is giving you some really good answers. We're trying our best, so never hesitate. That's what this platform is for. So, you know, we want to help. So, but I just want to add before we get to Connie is that, you know, it is that concern that, you know, you're going to have that inmate that's problematic. It may have that one inmate that tries to be the hero. But I want to mention two things that David Still said that I don't want to overlook. And I think it's very important. It kind of touches on what we were saying, which is the universal precaution side. And that's what we act on, guys. That's just our background, it's who we are. It's hard to escape from that. But it was about control. And I love David Still said two comments that really hit home. Allowing another inmate to intercede or giving them power starts down a difficult path. And then he also adds, don't give an inmate the belief he has power over other inmates with your approval. That matters too, because then obviously that inmate that believes they have that power over other inmates. I believe there was a thing in Texas a while back, maybe the 60s or whatever it was, building tenders. You had officers that were very complacent that let the inmates control other inmates. And then eventually there was some law that was passed that an inmate cannot give another inmate a direct order. You know, so once you start going down that path, like David said, you wind up having this inmate who winds up taking that control of the unit. And now you wind up accepting that. You know, you wind up accepting that because, again, it's slow and subtle. First, it's one inmate. Then it's two. Then it's three. You know, and next thing you know, you got a whole unit that's oppressed because the person that's helping you is a heavy gang member. You know, you don't know. I mean, you don't know how they have the authority over these other inmates. So because you don't know how they have that authority, what you do know is that you have that authority. So again, if you're having a concern with an inmate, try your best to maintain that level of control. But if you need help, got a radio. You know, call your people. Connie, what's your thoughts on this, Connie? You're muted, Connie. I always wanted to say that to you, Connie. Wait, hold on. Let me just get that off. Connie, you're muted.
The one thing that sticks out to me is that you never want to give the semblance that somehow you are in partnership with the inmates, right? It should not be okay that if you aren't able to control something, that you will somehow default and there is some sort of partnership with the inmate. You guys all touched on it already, but you know, what is the messaging that's being sent out to other inmates who they're observing you sort of default your authority to another inmate, and now it becomes that this inmate has authority in a unit with your approval. So that's what I was just thinking about, is just the fear look as though there is a partnership between you and the inmates in an effort to control a unit or in an effort to control any situation. Is just putting you in that situation where you're not going to be able to dig yourself out of that hole. And honestly, what I've found is that people get into that space. It's very hard to come forward and now say, I need help, when you should have said you needed help before you got to that position to begin with.
Yeah. And hey, guys, let me just get myself back over there. Hold on. There's a couple of good questions I want to address, but I'm also looking, there was a comment. Connie kind of cut her dialogue a little quick while I was still looking for this comment. Thanks, Connie. Oh, here it goes. So Raphael, I want to say Raphael, but it's Zephiel. He says, thanks for addressing that. I wasn't trying to suggest possible obligation or delegating duties, more peer pressure by inmates of the problem inmate so they don't miss the show or on TV. I get that. So basically what happens, and I've seen officers that have done this. I'm not a big fan of it. It's called collective punishment. And what that does really, it winds up turning what could be a controlled problem into a bigger problem. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an inmate that's problematic on, let's say, an overnight shift, just constantly a hassle. So the officer, in order just to kind of, you know, address this inmate, they wind up keeping the lights on in the unit, you know, and affecting all the inmates to make it look like, okay, hey, guys, this inmate's the problem. Unfortunately, they're not listening. So now everyone's going to suffer. So then you get the workers. I mean, I'm a little specific with my example, but the workers that got to get up in the morning for food service start getting upset. So what have you done here by this collective punishment? One thing that you've done is you've made this inmate a target. So now you put this inmate's life at risk. That's definitely something that's a problem. But the second thing is, guys, is if they don't look at that inmate as a problem, who's the problem now? It's you. So now you just united all these inmates against you. You know, so you're not de-escalating it. You're actually making it a lot worse. And I believe, and this could be made more of an old school method, but I definitely saw it in my career. And again, I was a little specific with my example, but I'm sure we could think of other examples where there's that form of collective punishment. But let me go back to Gary and Russ real quick on this. Are you guys familiar with this collective punishment routine? I'll go with Russ first. Let me get you in, Russ. Hold on one second. There you go, Russ.
Yeah, you know, collective punishment is one of those things that you probably shouldn't do unless you really, really know what you're doing. I wouldn't touch it. What I usually tend to do is, rather than collective punishment, I just use my presence as a way to call attention to what an inmate's doing. And by giving the extra attention that he so desires to people around him instead, I don't name it, I don't call it out, I don't make it obvious, but eventually sometimes that gets to be the idea of where, you know, some of that peer pressure does come in. It can be a very dangerous thing to do, though. So unless you're really sure about, you know, how you're applying it and whether you're within, you know, the law and policy and procedure, you got to be careful, right? What I would do, though, often is, you know, if I had problem inmates and stuff, I mean, I'd search the whole dorm, no problem, and search everybody. And then that way I wasn't singling any one person out. But it's better, having said all that, and a more direct route, to go ahead and just start hanging that paperwork on that one particular individual start making it expensive and exasperating, and where they have to deal with you all the time. And part of the problem is that we as humans, we're very direct, we're very forward. We want to solve things instantly because, you know, we have that that predator mentality. And so rather than take the time to do all those things, we want to do it right then and there. So my suggestion is that you back off away from that. You let the process run its course, and you keep that constant steady pressure on them day after day after day. And don't worry about that instant gratification of making them break, making them comply to what you need them to do. Take the long way, you know, approach it from that long view. It's much less stressful.
Yeah, and before we get to Gary, I want to comment on something here too. So I want to, since we've been kind of doing the reverse perspective, I want to add something here. I was just thinking, imagine being an officer and, you know, you're doing your job, you're highly professional, you know, and you got the tools that you need to be effective. And you find out another officer uses their OC spray in an unprofessional way. So management decides to, universal precaution, take OC from everyone. You know, maybe at first we're mad at that officer for misusing the OC, but then our anger is going to start going to management. Like, why would you do that to me? I have a right to be protected. I did nothing wrong. Now you took away my chance to protect myself. So the collective punishment that you think is working isn't working. And all it does is create animosity. It's not going to create animosity, maybe briefly, between that one person who did it, but eventually they're all going to talk about management because management is the one that did the action. You can't negate the action. You definitely can't say, well, I did it because this person misused it, but I didn't misuse it. So you took it from me. It's personal to me. So I find that when you have that confrontational inmate and, you know, again, the old school method is, you know, maybe there's a method where, you know, I'll have the inmates and I'll go ahead and do something where the other inmates will chase. Like, I'll give you an example. Another one where you have let's say you have a problematic inmate. I know people may know this little scenario too. And when you do searches, you leave this one inmate's area nice and neat. And then you go ahead and you mess up everybody else's area. You know, I know we're familiar with that. But again, guys, it just adds to your stress, to the work of having to protect that inmate. It's not needed. I'd rather just deal with that inmate directly. And if any concerns, I have my backup. But what's your thoughts on that collective punishment when dealing with maybe one confrontational inmate, Gary?
Yes, I'll answer that question. I just want to point out one thing. Somebody made a comment, own your housing unit, which I like. Another person made a comment, stand your ground, and I like that as well. So whoever you two were, I'm getting old, folks. I can't remember these names as they flash by me. I like those comments. Stand your ground and own your housing unit. Kind of goes back to what we discussed earlier. Now, as far as the collective, I think it's better to go to the problem itself and take care of the problem and remove the problem if you have to. As Russ said, use the paperwork. But let me tell you what the inmates are going to do sometimes. Now, you've removed the problem. You've taken care of it. You've got it out of the dorm. Watch out for those inmates that come up to you and say, CO, man, thanks for getting that guy out of here. You did a great job. He's a problem. He's a pain in the ass. He's holding us up. When you start having inmates coming to give you compliments, what a great job you did, CO. Thanks for getting that guy out of here. Don't get all puffed up and proud because something's up. You know, they're trying to sugar you up a little bit. Tell those inmates, look, don't worry about it. We did what we had to do. Let's get back to normal. Let's get this count over, get down. Let's go back to normal routine and do what the person said earlier. Own your housing unit and do what the other person said. Stand your ground, because inmates will come to you with manipulation tactics to try to butter you up, saying, great job getting that troublesome inmate out of here. Okay. They don't need to worry about that. We did our job. Now it's time to move on. I just wanted to make sure I get that in there because there's the other side of the coin. After everything's over, you're going to have these inmates come and try to butter you up.
Yeah, I think that's obviously spot on, Gary. Oh, go ahead, Russ. You got something you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to dovetail in on what Gary said there. He's exactly right. You never know what their motive actually is. And, you know, I had that happen to me. I had an inmate come to me he was actually like one of the white guy shot callers in this one housing area in a dorm. And he told me that this guy, that everyone wanted to beat him up because he was staying up all night, because he was doing methamphetamine. And so sure enough, you know, I pinched this guy, caught him with a little bit of meth and stuff, and got him removed, because he was definitely high and freaking out, right? So on the surface of it, what does that look like? It looks like these guys were concerned, and this guy was staying up all night, and that was giving them concern, because, you know, they didn't know if he was going to trip out or freak out. But what it really came down to is this guy had a connection with some methamphetamine and had sold it to these other guys, but they hadn't paid yet. And so the shot caller just thought, well, I've got my meth now, and so I'll just get this guy moved out. Now, is there any way I could have avoided that? Probably not, because sometimes you just got to work with what you got at the moment. But it's always good to be cognizant of what's actually going on and understand that there might be repercussions that you can't see further down the line.
Yeah. Hey, Con, you have any thoughts you want to add to the collective punishment? I know it's a little bit, I know that we're on the custody side here, but if you have something you want to add, you know, yeah, I know. You know what? Hold on. You have no choice. Give us something.
Oh gosh. So I mean, I just feel like that's usually when you incite riots and craziness, right? Like I just recall thinking of a time where like someone decided to turn off like an NBA playoff game because the inmates were arguing over like the seats in the day room. You know, all that did was get everybody riled up. So like I'm never a fan of that, because now you've got people coming in to support this situation that could have technically been addressed or de-escalated if that person had control of the unit. And I don't even want to say it like they had control of the unit, because most of the time we don't even know that these things are kind of brewing unless we're present, right? Which I think it's a sort of a nod to the fact that there are many officers that are always kind of on the stroll. They're always walking, they're always touring. And so for some who don't get up and don't hear that something is brewing, you know, I think maybe the collective punishment is, I don't know if it's the easy way out, but like I feel like it's probably the last resort in my opinion, right? But like I do think about, what does that mean when you turn off the TV in the day room and everyone's watching the NBA playoffs, right? Everyone's going to be agitated. Everyone's going to be in a space. And on top of that, whoever was creating the situation, that person is going to be the target, because everybody knows who it was, right? So we've kind of made a bad situation worse. So I would not lean on the collective punishment at all.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to see that we're all on the same page with that, because again, I walked in on that coming into this profession, and eventually started dying down. I don't see it as much anymore. Sad thing is, I see it more with staff now, which is sad. I see a lot of tools being taken away by high-level lawmakers because they kind of generalize an extreme. And unfortunately, like, again, with the tools that we have that we need to survive, you get one person that misuses it, and instead of people promoting the good, they focus on that negative, and now the negative becomes the standard of how we all operate. So collective punishment just, it does not work. It just, you know, again, hopefully that we could do a whole discussion on that. There was two good questions that I saw that I definitely want to get to. One, we actually did a whole show on this, but I would love to kind of revisit it briefly here. And it comes from David Still. And I know the moment I ask this question, Russ is going to start getting antsy, because, yeah, I think he knows what I'm getting at, because we did a video on this a while back, but it was Russ's suggestion to do the video. So once I ask this question, Russ is going to want first dibs at answering it. So I'm going to go to Connie first. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right, so wait. So how do de-escalation policies affect operations? Does it create scenarios where we hesitate instead of acting and staff get injured? Russ, Tier Talk is yours.
Absolutely. You know, we press de-escalation so much of the time, and then it gets put in either, you know, by policy, procedure, or even worse, by law. into a position where, you know, we're expected to always use it first, when it is clearly the inappropriate tool to use, where hesitation is going to cause things to get worse, where hesitation is not going to give you the tactical advantage over the inmate. So to just come in and just, you know, unilaterally declare that we're always going to de-escalate is the wrong answer to whatever solution that we're trying to come up with at the moment. Because as we step into these scenarios, what happens is officers, they start to get tongue-tied, they start to have their attention split. So, and there's actually, if you want to read about attention splitting, there's a lot of it out there. Just how much attention can a person split before they start to hesitate and before they get themselves into a position where they don't have their tactics forefront in their mind. And by that, what I mean is they're not making sure that they're positioned well. They're not in a position where they can strike if they need to. They're not in a position where they're ready to, you know, deploy their spray or their baton, or to keep themselves in a position of advantage because of all this attention splitting, right? And things start to slow down. It's just like, you know, your phone or your computer, when you're everyone else is, you know, streaming, you know, 3 or 4 different items in your household, and things start to bog down, and then the hesitation steps in, right? And it's real easy to bite into because you're overloading yourself with that idea about what do I have to do to de-escalate the situation. Sometimes the immediate answer is you shouldn't be de-escalating it. You should be, you know, acting. You should be slamming the cuffs on them. You should maybe have to use a little force to wrestle them to the ground. It's dependent. You have to make that, though, somehow, whatever you do, conform to your policy, and you have to be able to justify it on paper. So the best thing that I can tell you is to be truly situationally aware and worry less about what you're about to say than what you're about to do until you can get over that first hump of your analysis of what the situation is going to call for. And it's very, very difficult, especially when you're a younger officer. If you're older and you put yourself in enough of these high stress positions by raising your hand all the time, which I advocate, so that you're the one out there that's actually, you know, dealing with all this stuff, you'll get better, you'll get faster, you'll get more likely to not have to use force. So that's what I advocate in doing this. You know, try and stay on your legislators and your admins and your managers about what they're actually asking you to do with policy with regard to de-escalation, because I'll tell you, some of it's just damn dangerous.
Yeah, and can I tell you something? When me and Russ did that episode, there was a huge wake-up call for me also during that episode, because one thing is when you go to, if the situation allows it, obviously you're going to make the effort to de-escalate. But look what we just said, if the situation allows it. But I don't think you're going in there with that as being the priority. That's the concern. So when you have a lot of people saying, hey, guys, you got to de-escalate first, you got to de-escalate first, your priorities start to shift. And now you start to become hesitant as to whether, well, maybe I better not go in. Maybe I should make the effort to de-escalate first. You know, again, if the situation allows it, you'll know, and you have time. But, you know, if you're walking into the situation with the back of your mind saying, hey, I got to de-escalate first, you could be putting, you know, making yourself vulnerable. You could be making, if you're a supervisor, you could be making the team that you supervise vulnerable. I like what Russ is saying. And guys, it doesn't mean that we promote violence or acts of aggression. What we're promoting is some level of control to save lives, but also to make sure that we protect the team and their mindset is ready for what has to happen or what could happen. So if you're going there strictly with that mindset that, you know, I'm going to go in there, de-escalate first, now you have a team that's not ready to step it up to that next level because the situation may not allow that de-escalation to occur. I know you got a backup thought on that, Russ, right? Because I see you raising your hand. You got something?
Yeah, you know, I thought that maybe I might have a good story that'll kind of, you know, illustrate that a little bit. You know, I, as a young officer, and back then when I was first coming up, with the way you revered and were actually probably like afraid of your captain, who you probably never talked to, unlike today where things are better and a lot more open and there's some back and forth. But I had this inmate, and he was in the hospital, and he was sitting there, and you could tell that something was wrong with him. And the captain came in, and I had just started to approach this guy. And, you know, I was doing all the right things. I was getting myself into a position to be ready. And then the captain came up and was just like hovering over my shoulder, watching what I was doing. And my attention split. And I had just asked the guy a question, and I had looked away to look at the captain because I was nervous as a you know, young officer like that. And the inmate looked up at me, and thank God that what happened wasn't worse than what it was. But he said, "You know what?" And he opened both of his hands like this, and he took a razor blade out of his hand and he put it in his mouth. And so right then, you know, I had, guilty me, you know, I had taken my attention off. And what I should have done right then is I should have clocked him, right? And I would have been justified, and it would have been the right decision. You know, in spite of the fact that things turned out good later, the right decision at that point in time was not what I did. But at that point, I did grab a hold of him. I got him into cuffs. We had to wrestle him up 2 flights of stairs. We had to stand with him in front of an X-ray to see if the razor blade was there, and all that based on me hesitating because of what I was afraid that my captain was going to say, do, or think. So yeah, it's a concern, slowing down and trying to de-escalate things instead of taking the immediate action which was called for in that case.
Yeah, and I also want to add too, de-escalation is not a bargaining system. You know, it's not a compromise on our end. De-escalation is what we do if we have to get control. And at that moment we can get that control, we take that control. I think a lot of people think that when we go out there to de-escalate that we're bargaining, or that we ourselves in the position of control where we need to have authority is we're going to compromise that during that de-escalation. No, it's going to be to give us the moment we need to get that level of control. I think that becomes a confusion too, because when people look at what happens, like, well, you know what? The inmate also said they wanted this, this, and this. No, we're not bargaining here. You know, I'm just trying to calm the mood down so we don't have to take it to that next level. But I'm not going to go ahead and sacrifice my position of authority, you know, because again, I'm looking to de-escalate. The priority is always going to be, I need to have that level of control. If the situation allows it and I feel it's safe, I'll work an effort to de-escalate, not to compromise and not to bargain, but to de-escalate, to calm down the moods. But at any moment where I feel that I'm losing that level of control, or we're going down a road I don't want to go down, guys, I'm taking the control. We have to. It's just, we have to. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on David Still's question?
Well, first of all, I would really hate to think that any manager would try to punish you for protecting yourself. But has it happened? Yes. Let's be real, folks. We have some managers out there that didn't do a lot of floor time. They don't know what is really happening, and they get, you know, promoted up in the ranks so fast. And I've had people tell me, oh, you know, that captain was on admin the whole time. He never really did anything, but yet he's going to tell you how you should do your job. Sorry if I'm a little blunt, but there's the blunt side of me coming out right now. Listen, do you want to go home at night safe to your family? The best advice I can give you in this, use your gut. All of us have a gut instinct. All of us have the first thought that comes to our mind. If you feel that inmate is about ready to make a move to harm you, you got 2 choices. Back out because you're keeping your distance and call for backup. If you're in a situation where you can't back out, then you defend yourself. You get that inmate down, you cuff him and stuff him. Because I'm telling you, the most important thing there is for you to go home at night. You can worry about what is going to happen later because you protected yourself. Remember, you were in fear of the inmate causing bodily harm to you. You didn't know what the inmate was going to do. Remember what the inmate says for your report. I know this isn't a report writing issue, but now you've got me on a topic where report writing is very important. You want to know you want to put in your report the body language the inmate showed you. He put his fist up or she put her fist up. He raised his arm up at you, spit at you, made a move like he was coming towards you. That's so important. Okay. That's why you took the inmate down. Also, he told you he's going to kick your ass or whatever. All these things are very important. So now when you're in front of somebody with their policy and procedure, you have all this documentation of why you protected yourself. You know, I didn't cover other things. Russ covered it very well. So let me tell you about this other side of use of force. Put in your report everything the inmate said and body language. Protect yourself. Go home and use that gut instinct.
Yeah, Gary, I 100%, because guys, I'm going to tell you something. A lot of the times the confrontational inmates say stuff that could be vague and could be left for interpretation. So how you create the context in that report can help people make a determination of the inmate did mean something aggressive by it. So the body language, the clenched fist, them coming towards you, if that's what's happening, write it. Because now that vague statement that the inmate said that maybe the hearing officer may say, well, they could mean anything by that. No, look at the rest of my comments. They were coming at me aggressive. They were hands clenched. I mean, paint a picture that gives the context, that gives meaning to whatever that vague statement is. Connie, I want to ask you also about de-escalation, just in your thoughts. What's your thoughts on? Do you think de-escalation could make staff hesitant? Muted, Connie. Second time in a row. Oh, bingo. Bingo. I take B1 for the win.
Oh my God, I can't. So I think it does. I think that, when the staff get put in a position where, I think, yes, we have to be thoughtful. We have to be critically thinking all the time. But I think sometimes we put these policies in place that cause us to second guess ourselves. They cause us to, instead of using our common sense, instead of using our judgment, we think of the policy, but we have to acknowledge that the policy hasn't taken into account every single situation that could present itself. So there's no way that policy is all knowing, all giving, and is going to be appropriate in every situation. So for me, it is not forgetting all the skills that you've acquired since day one, right? And I get, we may have some new folks that may not have acquired that gut feeling, the instinct, all that other stuff that kind of helps us get by in this industry. But it is understanding that, yes, this is a policy that's in place. I mean, I actually put a comment up on Facebook that it is a tool. Here's another tool for us to be able to use, but that doesn't mean you throw away everything else and you only focus on that. But it's that tool that kind of puts us in that space where we begin to second guess ourselves and we start almost trying to calculate, is this decision going to be justified? Is it going to be supported? And if I don't follow this policy, what is it going to make me do? And, at the end of the day, I feel like when you go to document, it matters that you put down every detail in that document, including so I think, yes, the body language, all that other stuff. But I think it also matters that you put down what you felt in that moment, right? Because that's something that I think is sometimes missing. Like, I felt whatever that was in the moment, when that person balled up their fist, or when their tone got more aggressive, or if they looked at you a certain way, or if you saw a shift in their body. Like, we don't usually, and I don't know that we exclude those things intentionally. I think that in the heat of the situation happening, sometimes we start writing and we forget those little details that are actually really important for painting that picture that we need to be very vivid for whoever's reviewing that report.
Yeah, and guys, there are some good questions coming in. I just want you to know, I know we're going to try to go till around 10:30, but I want to make sure I'm hitting up a few from Andy. He's got some really good questions. So, Andy, if we don't get to all of them, save those questions for the next live next Tuesday. Also, Mocha has a good question, and so does Nam. But I want to go with Mocha. I want to go with Andy first, and then I'm going to go with Nam, because it kind of relates to the confrontational inmate. And then as the bonus towards the end, Mocha, I will get to your question. it's a little, again, it's a side topic question, but I do want to get to it out of respect. It's a great question. I just want to get to the topic. So please, I am going to get to it. I just give me a second. We'll get to the other ones, but I haven't missed the question, but I just give us a little bit of time. I want to get to the ones that are more related to the topic, but we will address yours. Andy had a good question. I kind of like this question. I'm going to go with Gary first on this one. If an inmate's giving you a hard time, is it a bad idea to pat or cell search him to kind of show control? So I'll start off by just saying what could be perceived as retaliatory. I know the moment I saw that question, I'm thinking retaliatory. So, yeah, Gary, you want to go first on this, Gary?
Well, if an inmate is giving you a hard time, then he could possibly become very dangerous. So I, in my opinion, don't think that you need to be patting him down and searching him just to show who's the boss, because I have an inmate giving me a hard time. So my focus is more on, is this inmate going to become aggressive and attack me? Or what is this inmate up to? I want to make sure the inmate is secured, removed from the dorm or area, and we find out what this inmate's problem is. And yes, once we have the inmate secured, then we'll take care of any searches or anything like that. But remember, your safety is first. So if the inmate's giving you a hard time, how much of a hard time? You know, is he bowing up to you? Is he verbally threatening you? Either way, he could become dangerous. So now you're going to put yourself in a position to pat search the inmate, and he could attack you. I would rather get control of the inmate, the full control of the inmate, get him removed from the area where I'm in full control, and then we'll search the inmate, make sure he has no weapons or anything on him. But I'm a little bit hesitant. Now, we do routine pat searches where inmates are walking along and we say, hey, get on the wall, and we do a routine pat search. That's a little bit different, but you just said an inmate's giving you a hard time. Don't think it's the time to do that right then.
Yeah, I want to add something, and I'll go to Russ, and I'll go to Connie. So obviously we're all familiar with retaliatory searches, pat frisk, more of an old school thing. The problem here, guys, is that obviously we have to do our searches. We have to be able to be spontaneous with our searches. We have a full unit to search, and then we have to do probably 3 or 4 spontaneous searches a day. I don't know what your policy is, but I will say one thing. Now, with the way corrections is moving forward, are you documenting your retaliatory pat frisk or searches? I mean, is the inmate going to start saying, that they're being harassed? And then when you start to look at the book, you see that this one inmate is being pat searched and cell searched 30 times in the month, and no one else is being pat searched or, cell searched, or not even nearly as close to this number. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have an inmate that's, problematic or high risk, yes, they're going to be getting hit up all the time because of their own actions. But you have to be able to justify it. Like, I mean, you really have to be able to justify why you're hitting this person up all the time, because eventually you're going to have a lawyer that's going to be able to pick that up, and they're going to start to see a little bit of an unfair treatment. So you're going to have to explain something that goes beyond the personal. Not because I'm doing this every day because I don't like them. I'm doing this every day because this person has a history of bringing in this or getting this or whatever the contraband may be. So I know maybe back in the day, it was one thing, but now it's not. But that doesn't mean there's other ways to advertise our level of authority. I think the inmates know we have the power to do that. I mean, the other ways to advertise your level of authority is by literally having control of that inmate. Giving the inmate the directives, and if they choose not to listen, go to your support, go to your supervisor, and see what the next steps have to be. But if you keep on doing it this one way, lately the inmates could take this to court. There could be some level of harassment. And if you're not able to justify why you're doing those searches as aggressive as you are in regards to the number of times you've done it for this one inmate, and they're going to ask, and then they can subpoena, let's see the searches on this unit, and let's see, and they can even pull video. Maybe you're not documenting these searches that you're doing with this person, but they'll pull the video, and they notice every time you're messing up this inmate's room. One of the things in the handbooks they say is that there's no retaliatory searches. There's no retaliatory cell searches. There's no retaliatory pat searches. You're doing it because it's part of the function, but you're also doing it in an objective and fair manner. And that's one of the things that they push on from day one. Cell searches and pat searches cannot be done in a manner that could be seen as retaliatory. So again, you're going to have to be pretty creative if you decide to do that route. I just would never recommend it. I just feel there's other routes you could take to establish that level of control. And I did like Gary's perspective as well. It puts you at risk. It also gives you something like you're predictable now. I expect you now to do that. So I think it does tend to be a little bit. I'm just not a big fan. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
So the way that I like to look at it is my search is never going to be a retaliatory search. It's also not going to be a random search. You've given me reasonable cause, at the very least, for me to believe that you're ingesting some sort of controlled substance or alcohol or whatever. I like to search and find out what these guys are about, if they're specifically going out of their way to try and mess with me. Then at that point, I think it's time for me to invest in an investigative effort to try and get some fruits in order to resolve whatever that issue is. Now, as far as I did like what Gary said, though, what you're doing at that moment in time, though, is not about that search potentially of his area or a search about him. I don't do pat searches on inmates before I've cuffed them, generally, because you put yourself in a position of disadvantage unless it's that random pat search or they're coming through from culinary or something like that. I like to get the bracelets on them first because things go very bad if you don't do that. So if this guy's giving me a hard enough time that I feel that I need to put him in bracelets, well, then we're going to go there too. And then we're going to document that. And then we're going to have him cleared by medical. And I'm going to take those things out of my toolbox every time if I have to, until this inmate feels that he has enough of my attention that he realizes that it's not worth it. I don't do that with every inmate, but ones that have decided that they need to be a special problem for me, like I say, I document it and I follow that thing. It's not retaliatory and it's not random. This inmate's given me cause to believe that something's going on. So it just depends on what level you need to take it to and which tool you're going to use in your bag at the time.
Yeah, and guys, if you notice something real quick, we all are on the same page. Me, Russ, and Gary have said the same thing. I mean, again, I said if you are going to do it, you got to write that report. You got to be able to justify it. So even though we tend to have a different perspective, all roads meet to the same area. At the end of the day, the retaliatory aspect, if you can't justify it, that's going to be where your greatest concern is. And again, also Gary and Russ were quick to point out the safety concerns, which I wasn't even thinking of at that moment. I was more pushing on the inmate pushing for that harassment and how we're able now to deal with that. Because I always think as an administrative level, the highest level up, where could this possibly go? And usually what I see on my level is just, the documentation being pulled, the, videos if need be, and just the inmate being able to say that their rights are violated and people from the outside just seeing what they feel is unfair treatment in comparison to the other inmates. Now, if that's something that you're able to do aggressively to all inmates, because maybe that's a requirement of that facility, it's a high max area, well, then it is what it is. That's part of the daily routine, safety and security. But if at any moment it's seen as something separate and you can't justify it, it just opens up a door that I don't think you want to open. What's your thoughts on that, Connie, when it comes to what I call it retaliatory, but I don't know, maybe, some people may see it as different.
I mean, anything that could possibly be seen as retaliatory just means that we're opening ourselves up for liability, and that's just not what we want to do. I don't feel that it's necessary to sort of single this inmate out at the time because they're giving you a hard time, because I think that just creates an unnecessary tension that later on you're going to have to deal with if you don't deal with it in the moment anyway. I also feel that ultimately when we have these situations, we have to be more strategic with how we address those inmate issues, right? Because they're going to test us all the time. And so what happens with the next inmate who does the same thing, right? So it's just understanding that We've got many tools in our toolbox to use when we come across problematic inmates. We can't cuff everybody all the time. We can't have like this friction with all the inmates. It's just not practical. And so we do have to kind of dig in our toolboxes and find more strategic ways of dealing with these different inmate interactions that, I mean, they're never, well, I don't want to say they're never pleasant, but it's usually not a pleasant interaction, right? And so we just don't want to start that precedence that that's the approach we're going to take every time we have, you know, some difficulty with an inmate.
Right. And again, this is just a higher level down. I mean, maybe in the moment on that immediate 4 level, you may see the gratification, but eventually, guys, as it travels up, it could be seen as something a little bit different. Every action that we do, every document we put out there, it's always going to be seen by someone from the outside looking in. So there's 2 more questions I want to get to. And then, because as I said, we try not to go past 10:30. But there's 2 more important questions. One is the bonus question from Mocha. So I'll get to that one. But the question right before that, and Andy, don't forget to remember those questions. We do a live stream, guys, every Tuesday. So next Tuesday, I believe the discussion I have written down is I'm going to kind of borrow one of the questions that Andy mentioned today when it comes to controlling your housing unit. I think that's going to be a great topic. I think that's something we all could have a perspective on. I know we definitely dealt with the handling of a housing unit, but also Connie, as a civilian side, we want her to feel safe. So when she's walking in, what would she expect from an officer to give her that level of safety? So I think it's a great topic that we all can have a good discussion with. But the one question I wanted to get to was, it's Tyler. I want to finish off with Tyler, and then the bonus question is going to come from Mocha Cafe de Paris. Now, guys, Mocha Cafe de Paris, her question is going to be off topic. So I'm going to get that towards the end. So this will be the last question on confrontational inmates. Person goes, I work at a work release prison. Our response officers take a lot of time to come and get contraband from a shakedown and other situations. How do you get over the worry of that? I want to explain. I want to share a story with you, and this kind of touches on the topic, believe it or not. But at one point I was a supervisor of a camp, and the camp was about 10 minutes. Well, it's not 10 minutes away. I mean, you know, but by the time a team gets there, it could take about 10 to 15 minutes because the team had to come from the main building. And I remember doing my rounds. You know, I always had good officers around me, so I felt confident in my 2 officers, you know, responding if I needed help. But again, when you're working in those work release units, obviously it's an open dorm. You know, the chances for the inmates to take over, it could be a very scary environment because, again, even though it's a full-man unit, the environment is not in our benefit as custody. Again, they're open areas. Inmates have a chance to interact, especially if we're not paying attention to who we're putting into these units. We could be populating them with gangs that just really severely outnumber us. And the biggest threat to an officer, obviously, is the unity of all the inmates. That's why I like to do every day is make sure we don't do anything that unifies the inmate population as a whole. So I remember doing my rounds and doing what you call a U. And I remember an inmate, as I was doing my rounds, and this is after hours, guys. We're talking about maybe 11:30, 12 o'clock. I heard an inmate jump off the bed, which was usually not routine during third shift. Usually, especially when you're doing your rounds, inmates know to stay on their beds. If they have to go to the bathroom, they wait for us usually to step off. But at that time, when you're doing the rounds, you don't move. So as I'm going around, when I start to get to this blind spot, now, by the way, the officer is not that far from me. You know, they were touring with me, but kind of sensed something. The inmate catches me at a blind spot. Now I'm kind of caught up at the corner wall. I have my radio in my hand, and the inmate kind of just starts coming at me. I was like, yo. Now, mind you, the funny thing about corrections, we don't have a lot of tools. We have to go to communication first. And thank God we do go to communication first because, again, not being in an environment like this, you want to grab a weapon because you don't know what's coming your way. You don't have that option. So you do go for that communication. And the funny thing is, it was an inmate that I used to deal with behind the wall when I was surrounded by my peers, and it was just the immediate setting. But now that same inmate who thought we had a rapport, you know, in a full-man setting out in the open without these obstacles in the way, totally different. You know, just coming up to me, it was like, whoa, hey, oh, Gangi, but we were never good. We, you know, did what we had to do in a professional setting to get by one another. How you doing, whatever, to always keep it moving. But this isn't a chance for you to jump off a bed and have dialogue, because at the end of the day, you know, you're an inmate. You know, I'm here for safety and security, and right now I don't know what you're trying to push. But again, just having that environment, that setting, and kind of just being that far away from a response, staff could be on edge. An inmate that you deal with normally in any other basis, now you get this one area where that response team is so far behind that, or could be so far behind, now it tends to be everything gets elevated. So I agree with Tyler when it comes to having that sense of I don't know, I like the worry or anxiety, but the only thing that I can say on that is that I had trust in the officer. So my big thing is, as long as I can get the code called out, which means that if I'm walking down with one officer, then I have one officer in a security area in case something does happen. So for me, I didn't want to be put in a situation where no one can make a call out. Or I know the response team is going to come. Hopefully me and the officer will split the beating. Again, because you want to make sure that it's going to take time for the team to come. So hopefully if we're both struggling, it lessens the beating on one. But having said that, I always felt okay knowing that I had an officer when I was touring around in a secured area that can call a code if need be. Yes, there would be a delay, but the more important thing was I needed to get that code called out, because when you're that far away, you can kind of feel isolated. You can kind of feel separate. And I think that adds to part of the anxiety. So knowing that you have that connection to the wall can alleviate that. Knowing that you're able to have someone in a position, also running those drills. You know, if you have a chance and it's a quiet night, you know, try to run drills to try to do what you can to get the response there quicker and quicker and quicker. But having said that, I think doing what I can to reinforce that connection. Hey, Russ, what's your thoughts on Tyler's question?
So when I was kind of reading this, you know, from what I was able to tell, it seems like, you know, there's either distance or there's physical features or both in the way that are slowing this thing down, as well as the placement of the manpower, maybe less than optimal. Maybe there's too many people on that shakedown squad. This is a situation that takes me back to think about doing things smarter and try and find better ways to deploy a couple people that can get to some of these more distant areas in the prison or whatever a little bit faster. You know, maybe making sure that along the way there's some equipment that they can pick up, whether that's, you know, some direct impact launchers or something like that. And then maybe somewhere in between all that, just try and figure out a better pattern to respond from. You know, what tends to happen is we just get used to doing the same thing and not worry about thinking about it in a smarter way. And it sounds to me like some people need to sit down and really think this out and find a way to decrease those response times. Might that cost a little bit of money? Might you have to add some positions? Yeah, but you know what? It's a lot less fun to talk about that after somebody's dead than beforehand, where you actually are able to put people in a position to impact that safety and security. You know, I know budgets being what they are, that people don't want to hear that, but that's some of the things that we have to do. That's some of the things that we have to take into account. Yeah.
Can I piggyback on something that Russ said too, by the way? Obviously, staffing is ideal. So obviously that would be the first thing. In Tyler's situation, I didn't know if that was an option. Again, we do have a lot of understaffed facilities struggling to find somebody, but obviously Russ is 100% correct. That should be brought up about the dangers, the delayed response, and maybe actually having a separate team for that response, because again, it's separate from the facility. You know, the response should not be coming from that main area. It should be coming from, you know, that satellite unit. If there's a satellite unit with an open area like that, oh, they're full men, doesn't matter. You should always have that response team on standby. So I would love for that to be the ideal suggestion. That's what it should be. So again, maybe again to alleviate, maybe that should be, you know, passed up and keep on passing up. So God forbid something does happen, the AGC can't say, well, we didn't know about it. Yes, you did. So I like what Russ was saying, you know, getting the word out there as well, you know, and the staffing would be ideal. I think part of the concern was if at this point it's not an option, then the thing you want to do is kind of make sure that you're, you know, dealing with what you do have. Because my other concern is too, is that when these officers leave from this other area, now you're leaving the other area vulnerable. So ideally, it's not even a good working system. It's not. But with understaffed facilities, you got to kind of trade lesser of two evils, which is a horrible way to work in corrections. It's a horrible way to work, you know, because then it forces us to make decisions that really the easier suggestion is more staffing. Well, we don't have that. Now it's like, well, you know what? Now I gotta make one area vulnerable to protect another area, and it's just a horrible situation to have to be put in. But having said that, Russ, 100% spot on. Ideally, because again, we do try to tend to address issues as well. I was more focused on the anxiety of the situation you're currently facing, but Russ was great in being an opportunist and taking advantage of that and saying, hey guys, get more staffing. So if I could fill in on that, just to 100%, that satellite unit should have their own team. You should not be taking the team that's in this main building and leaving that area vulnerable to get to your, plus having that backup team gives staff a level of confidence, and they wind up being more effective in what they do because they know, like, as you said, Tyler's a little worried right now. Is all right, he should be. So is he going to be truly effective in what they're doing? I don't know, because there's a great risk, because he's concerned that if he's chasing after contraband, how long is my response going to be? But I guarantee you, if Tyler had that immediate response, Tyler's chasing after all the contraband because Tyler knows that his people have his back. So again, 100% in agreement with Russ. Let's add that as people from the outside, you're listening, staffing. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, Tyler, let me pitch this at you, and then you can pitch this to your people. Our main prison is Polk Correctional, 20 or more miles from the work release center. The way we solve that problem is we work with our law enforcement agencies here as a group together. That's what we need to do. We need to work more with our local law enforcement agencies to help each other. Bartow Police Department is 5 minutes from the work release center, and the same with the Polk County Sheriff's Office. So we got together with them, and when something goes down at the Bartow Work Release Center, of course we notify the main unit and let them send somebody if they want to, but we have Bartow PD there sometimes within 1 minute because they're only 5 minutes from the main station. Now, I know everybody's not going to have this luxury, but you've got to have a local law enforcement agency close to you. Work with your local law enforcement. The response time for Bartow PD is 1 to 5 minutes, where the response time from our prison is quite a long time. It could be 30 minutes. And as Anthony said, if Bartow can get there quickly, you may not even have to deploy a unit from the Polk Correctional Institution. When you have a work release center, they're pretty much in the community because these inmates can walk to work, ride a bicycle to work, or their bus to work, depending on how you run your work release center. So now they're part of the community. Use your local law enforcement agencies to bring down that response time. Get together and communicate with your community and your local law enforcement, and you can cut down that law. And you'll have in the back of your mind, I know I got Bartow PD coming right behind me, so I'm going to get this inmate, I'm going to get the contraband, and you won't be sitting there waiting 30 minutes or an hour to get somebody from the prison that's far, far away.
Yeah, and I like that because that shows a good relationship. We need that, guys, with those other law enforcement professionals. So I think that really is a great way to encourage that. Hey, Connie, would you have any thoughts on that question?
So, I mean, I think the practical answer, Russ had pretty much given that already. I happen to have a nurse who worked in a separate building. And so, you know, of course, the concern was always, particularly on third shift, when we're already at a skeleton crew, you know, how does she get support if there's a code in the building where she was working? So it was like not necessarily on the same, it was on the same compound, but it was just far away from where everyone else was centrally located. And so we ended up creating sort of a response team that was specific for that building so that she wasn't feeling like she was left on her own over there, because that anxiety is real. You know, she began to, you know, she's going to work doing what she needs to do. But then there is that feeling that, you know, there's a code on the main compound, and then there's a code over there. Like, where does the support come from? So to mitigate that risk, we actually created a team that was assigned specifically for over there to fill in the gap. But I think the point that Russ made about not wanting to have to make those decisions or provide a justification over a dead body is really very poignant, to say the least, because that's our reality. That if we don't have the support and response is, you know, slow, or people are left on their own, it does put us in a very negative space.
Right. Hey guys, that was a really good question. I think that's actually worthy of a video. Maybe we'll try to toss a video out on that next week. I also have a request from someone else. I'll work on that. Also, guys, before I get to the last question, Thursday night, I'm going to produce a video for Russ. Russ has an idea for a video. Russ, quickly, what's the video about that we're going to put out on Thursday?
I'm going to talk about the physiology and psychology of acute stress. And by that, I mean what happens to you under an emergency situation with regard to things like tachypsychia and tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, and things like that. And maybe give you some tips on how you can manage some of those things so that they don't impede you from doing the job to the best of your ability.
Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to meet with Russ, probably have that up late on Thursday night, probably around, 11 or so. We'll meet Russ in the studio. We'll get that done. And tomorrow I am going to go live. Me and Connie, our partner on another channel called Duty Ron. And we're going to discuss some questions about dealing with a high profile inmate. I think that's going to be a pretty unique discussion, and it seems to be an audience that's pro law enforcement, believes in what we do. So I'm okay with going on that channel, because if we do bring an audience back, it's a professional audience that I think will relate very well to the community we have here. The one question that we couldn't get to tonight is from Nam. It was about the body cams. Hey, Nam, I have a whole video on body cams, but out of respect, if next Tuesday, if you're able to come on, please ask that question. And when you ask it, even if it goes a little off topic, I will go ahead and we'll answer that question right away. Because again, I couldn't get to it today. But these questions tend to be lengthy. So when you answer it, we wind up going past 10:30. And my timer isn't so much the clock. I just look at Connie. Connie be taking these longer blinks, and they get longer and longer and longer. So there was a blink that she took that was about 35, 40 seconds. So, but I wanted to get to Mocha's Mocha had a great question, kind of a little off topic. We've touched on this before, but I think it's a great question to end on. And I have it right here. And, I'll go first with Connie on this one. How do you deal with a sergeant that has abused their authority and you still have to work under their orders? Now, by the way, we could generalize that question to how do you deal with a supervisor that has abused their authority and you still have to work under their orders? So, Connie, as a female, maybe there's another perspective that you could provide as well.
So I don't think it matters if you're male or female. I think professionalism is always in order, right? Like, and, unfortunately, it's documenting as well, right? When these things start happening, you want to have a professional conversation with your sergeant, not a disrespectful one. It's not you trying to in any way challenge the chain of command, but really just raising a concern. And quite frankly, most managers should be open to having those kind of conversations with their team, right? And I get it. I'm talking team, we're talking chain of command, and those are really seen very differently. So I don't want to say it like it's not still a team, because it's still all a team. If a team member comes and gives me some sort of feedback, I think it matters that I've acknowledged that feedback, right? But here's the thing, when it comes to power, right? When there is an abuse of power, the reality is that we are all being put in a space where we're liable, we're vulnerable, and we have to speak up. If we don't say anything, it's almost like we're culpable, right? In whatever that violation is. So all I would say is you maintain your professionalism, because that is always appropriate, right? You can speak up. And then if it comes to that point, then you may need to go to the next level in the chain of command in order to address the issue that you've identified. But doing nothing is never the right answer, because it doesn't get better just because you ignore it or you don't address it.
Right. I wanted to, before I give my opinion on this, I was talking maybe Gary and then Russ. Gary, what's your thoughts on Mocha's question? And then don't forget, guys, Gary has a background as a jail inspector, or what you would call internal affairs. So this could also probably touch on that as well, depending on the specifics of the abuse of power. But Gary, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, Mocha, first of all, I want to say, before I answer your question, your comment earlier was very good. You said we must remove a troublesome inmate from a dorm. We must get rid of the cancer as soon as possible. Great comment you put earlier. Now, Mocha, and what Connie said is very good and very accurate. What I want to say also is there is nothing wrong with you going to the sergeant and saying, I need to speak with you, and discussing the issue with the sergeant. Now, the sergeant hopefully is open-minded and will realize, oh my gosh, if I'm doing that, I need to stop. If I'm abusing my power, I need to stop and own up to it. But some supervisors are going to be that way no matter what you do. They're going to continue to say, don't worry about what I do, just do what I say. Then you may have to go to the next, use your chain of command, as Connie said, and you may have to go up a higher rank to report this. Please document. Connie mentioned this, and I'm not piggybacking off Connie, but she said everything that I would say. And the reason you must document, what if one day this comes out to be an investigation, whether it's your internal administrative lieutenant doing the investigation, or it goes all the way up to the IG because you're filing a harassment complaint or whatever, because you know the IG does do civil rights complaints, criminal and administrative investigations. Well, we need to know, because if I'm coming to you and saying, okay, Mocha, when did this start? You need to know, what are some of the things that have happened? What are some of the things that were said to you? Has this happened to other officers? Do you have any witnesses? And I'm not saying we even ever wanted to get this far, but document. Protect yourself from a supervisor that is abusing their power. No, we don't want to go in there and try to take down the supervisor. We want to be fair. We want to be unbiased, but we also don't want a supervisor abusing their power to the point that it's making your work life just totally unbearable. And that has happened. And it really is hard to go to work with a bad boss, right? Who wants to go to work with a bad boss, an abusive boss, or someone abusing their authority? If we have to stop it, we have to stop it. Just keep those things in mind. Let's hope it never gets that far. But documentation is the key if it does get as far as an investigation.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that documentation. What's your thoughts, Russ?
So this is one of those situations where specificity is really, really important. You know, when we talk about, a supervisor is involved in some kind of abuse, well, that is obviously unacceptable. But at the same time, you know, you kind of have to take into account exactly what is that abuse. You know, is it a violation of policy, procedure, or is it a violation of law? Is it something that that maybe is, you know, more low level? It could be handled informally. Maybe, maybe not. And so it's very difficult for me to try and point to a specific course of action that you should take. If it's you know, true, absolute, you know, naked abuse, and you know, the laws being violated, you have to follow your chain of command. All right, there's no other way. If it's just something that maybe you don't understand about the situation or the person, or the way that they think that they're entitled to act, maybe you can approach them. But I hate to tell you to do that too. If you can afford to, and just you know, try and, you know, sit back and try and understand it a little better, as long as it's not impacting safety and security or something like that. Maybe it's something that you need to learn about, actually. I've just seen situations where, you know, some new staff didn't understand why sergeants were taking the actions that they were taking. So, like I say, without more specificity, it's just hard to put you on a path.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little general too in my response. Again, just be from the higher level, because we do deal with this. Specifics is always the best, because abuse of power could be subjective. You know, again, we don't know specifically, and obviously don't discuss it on a platform like this. That's not what it's about. The answer is very general, and you know, it's just for a question to be put out there. It's not necessarily has to be specifically related to you. It's just a great question that I'm sure there are many people in the group that are dealing with. So it's a very fair and general question that I'm sure many people could be having this experience. There also could be equal employment concerns. You know, if there's a concern where the abuse of power touches on a protective policy, a protective right, you know, something that you feel that now you're being treated unfairly about because, let's say, age, sex, ethnicity, religion, whatever it is. But the ultimate part about this is that the document part is 100%. And then the agency's protection against retaliation also falls into that. So once you document your concern to that next level up, as the matter is getting investigated, obviously, the person's probably going to find out that you made that documentation. The agency has to make the effort to protect you from being retaliated against, because that could fall into an EED concern or an ethic matter. So once you document whatever that concern is, the agency has to do their due diligence in investigating what that concern is. But in the process of investigating it, there's the integrity of that investigation to make sure that the matters being looked into a manner that's fair, objective, and unbiased. And also, again, when they're doing the investigation, their priority is to really to protect the needs of both parties, the one being accused and the one making the allegation. If at any point there's a violation in that due process, in that investigation, the integrity of it all, then you each could wind up having lawsuits against the agency or the person that's handling that investigation. It's a tough matter, because a lot of the times when we have these concerns, I believe it's kind of what Russ was crossing into. They cross into like a personal dynamic. You know, there's just two people that just don't get along personally, and they wind up taking it to this other level. And it turns out that the abuse of power really is just subjective. You just have two people that are not getting along. I mean, most of the time we may see it when you have a supervisor that writes up an employee. Maybe the employee did do something wrong, and then the employee is quick to try to make a complaint on the supervisor now. Usually it's instant retaliatory complaint because they feel, well, I'm going to do this to negate myself from getting in trouble. And of course, obviously, all that stuff will get investigated. But the key is, if you have a concern and you feel that the agency isn't addressing the concern, you could also take it outside of the agency. You know, you could also take it to the investigative authorities, you know, the Internal Affairs Division. I mean, again, depending on what that abuse of authority is, you know, again, obviously don't be specific with it, not on this venue, but with that said, you know, you have a right to keep on going. First, you try the level of the chain up. And by the way, when we talk about document, you're going to document specifically who you spoke to. So if I have a problem with, you know, hey, let me give Connie a promotion. If I have a problem with Sergeant Connie, you know, I'm going to go to Lieutenant Russ, and I'm going to document that I had a problem with Sergeant Connie, and I'm going to document that I spoke to Lieutenant Russ. And I'm also going to keep copies of my documentation, maybe even send out a follow-up email to see what's happening. All these things are meant to document, one, that you stated that there was a concern, but you also document what the agency did about that concern. So now I noticed something. When you do things like that and you hold people responsible, you're more likely to get a reaction. You know, but it's really about what you're willing to do. And if you have a person that you're concerned, well, if I do this, it's going to make my life more miserable, document any type of reaction that you feel is retaliatory based on that original complaint or concern that you have. But you have to be able to connect the dots. No one's going to do that for you, which means that if you know that now it's retaliatory because you put this complaint in, you need to be able to spell that out 100%. Because at that point, if you're not able to spell it out, the person being accused, they have rights too. You know, they could just be doing their job, and, you know, it is what it is. So again, the key is document. And if you feel that the agency is not doing their job to protect you during this investigation, document everything. And then you just bring it up to the highest level. So the lieutenant failed me, I'm going to the captain. The captain failed me, I'm going to the warden. But when I go to the highest level, I'm not just going based on the captain failed me or the lieutenant failed me. I'm going because Lieutenant Russ Hamilton failed me. Captain Gary York failed me. When you start putting specifics down, people can't defer that level of responsibility. And that's when you start to see them acting. Sometimes not because they want to, but because they have to. And I'm going to be honest with you, when it comes to making these complaints, nobody really wants to act. So you force them. Make them act. You know, and I'll be honest with you, it doesn't hurt to, when you send out an email, to have, you know, if I'm emailing a lieutenant about my concern, maybe I'll CC the captain on it. I'm still giving the concern to the lieutenant, but I'm going to CC the captain. So now I have the captain that's going to ask, hey, what about this complaint? You know, I'm still not violating the chain of command. I'm just making sure that I'm being heard, especially if I feel that this person is not going to do what's expected of them. So hopefully that helped you out. Mocha, we kind of got on our pedestal a little bit on that, but that's, you know, again, I'm on the administrative level, so used to that stuff. I'm sure, yeah, Connie's laughing. She's been there. And Russ, Russ may have been that supervisor. I don't know. No, I'm joking. Hey, Gary, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I just want to tell everybody that it was a great topic tonight, because your safety is always at risk. Be smart. Don't rush into anything. Back out and call for backup. If anything, if you're doubting anything that's going on, don't rush into it. Back out, call for backup. Stay safe, you folks, and thank you all for your service to our communities to keep everybody safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary, for coming on. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, in dealing with these problematic inmates, you know, be aware of your resources, be aware of your limitations, make the smart play every single time that you can. Work to make your facility a better, safer institution. Try and get more equipment. That's all I got.
Connie, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I guess I would just like to say we're going to always come across inmates that are confrontational. You know, I think it's best that we use all of the tools that we have and do our best to de-escalate where possible. But I just don't want us to ever put ourselves in a space where we're just second guessing ourselves and then we end up getting hurt. So, you know, follow your instincts. Yes, you know, policy, procedure. I'm not telling you not to follow policy and procedure. What I'm saying is that a lot of those policies, you know, they don't take into account every possible situation that you may encounter. And so just don't get yourself hurt because you fail to act.
Now, before I come on and say goodbye, I just want to put everybody on the screen because this was a panel dialogue. So I'm not going to exit with just having my face on. I'm sure that's what everybody wants to see. Well, hey, Connie. Watch it, Connie. You're on camera right now. No, so, but guys, again, we couldn't do these discussions if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you for asking us the very questions that motivate the dialogue. Dr. Z came in a little late. Hopefully, Dr. Z is coming from across the world, by the way. He's like in New Zealand or something. So, we expect to see him a little bit earlier next time, I hope. But guys, again, the next topic for next week will be controlling the house. You guys have any topics you want to recommend? Just feel free to contact us. We'll keep the dialogue going. But being a part of this community, if you guys can share the word every Tuesday, we do go live. We'll try to answer your questions or concerns. I'll bring on different guests or different people. And eventually when I start getting an understanding of the people that are coming on and start building the regulars, if you guys don't mind, instead of you guys asking the question on the board, if I do see a good question, maybe I'll bring you in, and we could share the dialogue live. You guys could talk to the panel directly. Guys, these are experts in the profession who, by the way, it's the questions that you give us that have made us better, believe it or not. Your questions are very challenging, very informed, and it causes us to really think, and which we love, but we're also not afraid to cover everything. So you have in this room, I got about 20 years. Connie has about 20. Gary about 28. Russ 72 years. So you have about, either way, you have close to 100 years experience, and just to be able to create this dialogue is truly amazing. But I think it would be a real benefit if one day I could start bringing you guys in and we could just have discussions that go past the one question. So I've seen on other channels where you ask the question, then we just kind of fill it in, and maybe within 10 minutes, then we get the next person on. And and definitely, Andy, you definitely would have my trust. So maybe next dialogue, you'll be the first person I bring on. We'll give you a chance to ask a few questions to the panel. And, again, related to the housing units, we'll try to keep the same theme. Or maybe one day when our numbers start to build, we can actually just do an audience-driven show where we just bring people on and just answer whatever the questions are. But for right now, we're just kind of keeping it with the theme. But Andy, you will be my first person I'm going to stream in, guys. Andy has built the trust. Andy will be the first person that we will stream in live, answering all of Andy's questions. So we may have to do that on a weekend, because Andy's got a lot of questions. But either way, Tuesday night will work. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe, everyone.